The way that I approach the topic of consent is different than a lot of what people typically consider the best record, right? But consent is something that's very important to me, right? It's very important to me. And there's a certain factor that takes place within consent, a couple of different things that I believe get overlooked by consent culture. And then there's an overcorrection that's done due to people talking about things that are toxic or things that are controlling or things that are predatory or something like that. And for me personally, I've seen the transactional nature of how consent can be. I've seen the turn-offs that can come from asking a woman about sex, right? Asking her to have sex. It's one of those things where I've been in scenarios in my own life and my own experiences where I would be about to engage with a woman and I'd ask her for consent, and then she would come back around to me, or she would just ignore me, then pull it out and do her thing, or she'd be like, oh no, we gotta go, and then without me even touching her, she takes her own initiative to start pulling it out for me. I've also been in scenarios where I would be in situations with women where I was attracted to the women, and maybe they wanted to drink or they wanted to smoke or they wanted to do whatever, and I'm very conscious of the fact that you can't consent when you're under the influence, right? But I think that a lot of things that go on with consent culture kind of dismiss some things that naturally occur. Like sometimes two people will just get drunk and have sex, and there's also a power play that goes into it. Because when it comes to consent, the power is within the ability to claim victimhood, right? Where having buyer's remorse is equivalent in a lot of people's eyes to feeling, assaulted. And another thing that can occur is the concept of coercion and the concept of pressure, right? Now, what this can often do is put people in scenarios where people are unable to be truly honest about what their needs, what their desires, what their standards, what their requirements are, because to place that expectation on an individual who's already emotionally invested in you is something that makes them feel pressure, right? Like if I were to give my own definition of what pressure is, I'd say that pressure is when an individual is in a situation where they are benefiting from a person, and what that other person wants them to reciprocate is something that they do not want to give. Understand that, right? Like, most women have no issue with telling a man no to sex. That's not pressure. If you just say, oh, I want to fuck. No, cool. Or just ignore you, not even really entertain the conversation. But when you've taken time to go the traditional route of dating, right? And let's say you're taking a woman out on dates, what I call, or let's say it's the big three. I call it emotional validation, social validation, and financial investment. And once those three things get into par, they get into the play, oftentimes an individual can grow an attachment to the non-sexual things that are being invested in them, the non-sexual access. And due to the non-sexual access that being invested in them, it can create a scenario to where someone who lacks a certain amount of boundaries, or someone who's dealing with a certain level of insecurity, may be willing to go forward with the sexual desires and of what the other person wants to do, because they don't want to lose the non-sexual investment that they're taking part in. So even if the person is technically consenting, they can still feel a certain level of coercion, pressure, and all those different things that come along with it. And, I'm a big constituent of BDSM, Dom sub dynamics, of masculine, feminine dynamics, sexual polarity. And one thing that I've noticed is that when you take this pleading, asking, begging, position with the woman, it often is a turnoff. Like I've had women literally tell me that asking for sex is a turnoff. I've had women tell me before, and this is kind of how I got into consensual, non-consent relationships, where a woman would be like, listen, you have the free reign to just go ahead and take it if you want it, but asking is something that feels like pressure. It turns me off. But when you just go ahead and do it, then I get turned on when you just go ahead and do it. When you take initiative, when you do that masculine and dominant thing, you just go after what you want. But there are also different factors that play a part, and that can be a very slippery slope. And it could be a slippery slope for several reasons. One of those reasons is that a person may not be completely in that same mood at all times. So they may want it to mostly be a situation where you're using some aggression, you're using some dominance, you're using some forward movement, and not having that conversation. But they can be in another state of mind on a different day, or even the same day, where they may just wilt under the pressure of that, but not really desire to do it. And it really depends on the mindset of the individuals. Like if a person is like in a master-slave type of situation, then they may take pleasure out of that. They may take excitement out of that. They may respect the person on the level to where they just like to feel useful. And that's something that makes them feel useful, so they go for it. But these are mindsets that can shift, that can sway back and forth. So for me personally, when I'm looking at the concept of consent, the way I like to go about it is what I call the biology first approach, right? Now, why do I say biology first? To be honest with you, it's like I see a lot of scenarios in which people see the most respectful and virtuous and upright and moralistic way of introducing a sexual relationship is to take time to invest in a woman, to get to know her, to make her feel quote unquote comfortable, and then to bring up your desires. And if she doesn't want to do what you want to do, then you have to respect her boundaries. But to then withdraw affection is something that people consider abusive, right? So it's kind of like a certain entitlement towards the non-sexual access that a woman has to a man, where if this man doesn't continue to give the same non-sexual access, or if his intentions are sexual, right? And if things are not going in that way sexually, the way he wants it to, he's no longer as invested or as interested in the scenario, then there's a certain virtue signal that comes about, where the man is being seen as some type of villain or some type of bad guy because he knows what he wants. He wants to have sex, he wants to do this, he wants to do that. And if a woman's not willing to do that, he no longer wants to do it. So I think a lot of it comes from internally, working within yourself, making sure you don't have very sexually negative views to where you would view being direct with women about your sexual intentions as something that is negative. But another aspect of it to me, or see that's something disrespectful, right? But another aspect to me is to make the focus of consent about seduction, and then to move in a dominant way to where the prerequisite to you performing dominant acts with a woman being that you give her instructions, and through those instructions she has to desire it enough to verbalize an act of desire to do the things that you want to do. Like, let's say the topic is like sexting, right? Like, people have a big conversation about like unsolicited dick pics and stuff like that. I'll be honest with you, I've had a good bit of women who send me unsolicited news and unsolicited even sex tapes. I've had women send me sex tapes where I didn't even ask for it. They just sent me sex or head videos that they've had with somebody else. And I didn't take that personally. I didn't get upset by it. But these are just things that I've experienced, right? And I think a lot of things come from, and you can see this a lot with like Tinder and other dating apps, where a lot of places are very gynocentric. They are very matriarchal. They are very set up with the premise of making things as comfortable for women as possible, right? Making things as comfortable for women as possible. And the way that they want to be comfortable is to basically not have any men that they aren't sexually attracted to approach them sexually. It's kind of like the whole concept of the halo effect and the whole concept of what I call the gentleman gigolo complex. These different things. Like, I know some times where I've had the most success on Tinder where before Tinder started really cracking down on bios and pictures and telling individuals that you couldn't put anything about your sexual preferences or your desires within your bio, right? I used to have BDSM in my bio, daddy dom, things like that, different things I was into, and I'd have that directly in my bio. And what that would do is it would weed out certain women that would match me versus who wouldn't match me, so that when I messaged a woman she might message me first if she liked my bio, or I'd message her, and then the dialogue would typically go directly sexual. Now, there's a steps to it and there's a way of going about it, but things would typically work out well that way. But after on Tinder, the bios started being very strict and restricted, and they'll take it off and put something like BDSM in there, then what would happen is I could send the same type of messages, but because I didn't have the ability to vet and weed out the women through my bio and through my pictures and the different things that I placed up there, that it would cause more women who are only online looking for non-sexual validation and non-sexual access to a man and looking for a relationship, or at least just looking for a relationship with me, right? Because one thing I recognize is that most of the women I probably had sex with off of like dating apps were women who typically had no hookups in their bio, right? Or were typically women who had, said that they were celibate or all different type of things, saying that sex isn't something that they were looking for, but that's the entire context of why they were dealing with me. So it's one of those things where a lot of these social norms and expectations and cultural themes and narratives when it comes to consent are things that are really predicated upon misandry and also giving a woman giving men in society the impression of giving women plausible deniability about the fact that they're sexual beings and that they have the ability to decide relatively quickly if they're sexually interested in an individual without that being something that is just inherently disrespectful by nature, right? Inherently disrespectful by nature. So I was in a BDSM back chat, and while I was in there, I was looking at this particular list, right? I was having a conversation, and this is something that I wrote down as a response, right? So I was talking about, the last video, one of the last videos I dropped on how degradation kink overpowers feminism, right? And we're just having a little conversation about that. And he said one thing that, and I know I'm sounding a little gibberish right now, get my thoughts together. It's kind of loud out here. But we're basically just talking about more dating coach, manosphere type of doms versus more so scholastic and scholarly and textbook doms, right? And how the way that I approach consent is something that may cause certain issues for how people look at dating and relationships, even when it comes to BDSM, right? So the comment that was given was, but even with textbook doms in the kink and area of humiliation degradation, the information is solid. I'm not sure what can be said in rebuttal, unless perhaps they say it's not consensual, but the consent is implied here. And then I responded and I said, yeah, a big part of it is how I approach consent is I lead with dominance, then instruct a woman to ask me for what I want to do to them, rather than meeting a woman and starting an interaction in a vanilla way, then having a pre-vetting conversation. I prioritize the seduction, right? That's what I said. And he responded and said, I get it. Now that's the only part I can see they would take issue with, but it falls under consensual non-consent. True. Now I said this, yeah, and I see where they're coming from. I pretty much reverse engineered natural seduction and what people consider toxic relationships to frame the dom-sub dynamic as something that doesn't have to be a, hey, we've been dating for a while, you into BDSM, or hey, we've been dating for a while, you want to have sex. Not saying that that is what most people do, but I feel it's more fluid and weeds out a lot of those who can't get with it at the door. Personally, I think that the investment of time and energy before bringing these things up, especially sexual things, can create or trigger a fear of abandonment, which can make what looks on paper to be consent to actually feel coercive or transactional. Whether that's a man feeling pressure to continue pursuing a woman until she is comfortable, or getting on her program so he can do the acts that he wants, or feeling pressure to continue to pursue a woman despite her hard boundaries being deal breakers and that being seen as a virtue. Or situations where the woman gets more attached to the non-sexual things like long conversations and dates and aftercare, and being willing to bend on what she is willing to do, not out of desire, but out of fear of losing non-sexual access. To me, a big part of how and why I do things the way I do is giving a woman the opportunity to reject my advance without there being anything that she's receiving from me that she's attached to, then focusing directly on seduction then transitioning into the other factors as those things are vetted for and the compatibility and polarity is established on a more natural level. So really, this is a lot of what my take on consent is, how I approach it. Like if you've seen my video on the Mr. Miyagi method, right? That's one thing, right? Because if you watch my video on the Mr. Miyagi method, a big aspect of it was, Daniel-san went there because he wanted to learn, how to fight. Mr. Miyagi had him developing his smaller muscle groups and getting the hard skills together so that his body and his mind and his discipline would be prepared to learn the things that were necessary to be learned for him to learn how to fight. But that whole time where he was doing it, it appeared that Mr. Miyagi was simply having Daniel-san do his chores, right? And that's kind of like a lot of how I approach the Dom-Sub dynamics, right? Because I'm a pleasure Dom, right? That means that my primary thing is to be giving a woman, taking her to subspace, giving her high levels of pleasure, multiple orgasms, forced orgasms, orgasm control, different things like that, edging, pleasure denial. And along that process, I like to open women up to new orgasms. I have a corruption kink, so I like to get women who aren't into things that I'm into already into things that I'm into, right? And just along that process, that's how it works for me. And when I first start off with a woman, I'm not going to start off just giving her the A-game dick off top. I'm not just going to start off doing everything I could do off top, because there's certain things that have to be vetted for. Like there are situations where it's kind of like this fine line between inadvertent behavior and aftercare, right? Especially when you're in transitional dating, and you're also a transitional dater within hookup culture, right? Because there's going to be some women to where if you take them to a very intense place, you take them to subspace, and in that place they experience sub drop afterwards, then if they don't get the proper aftercare, then they're going to feel hurt. They're going to feel taken advantage of, and it's going to create a quick shift in the mind to where she feels very negatively about you and or the relationship dynamic or herself, and it can be very psychologically damaging and traumatic. But on the other end, there's also women who are what I would call no-limit soldiers, right? And no-limit soldiers are women who are very comfortable and refined to live their life, at least at the moment, engaging in casual sex. But the caveat of casual sex is that there can't be any emotions or non-sexual things involved. Now, the no-limit soldiers will be split up into some different factors, right? So one would be a woman who says, do you just want to have sex, or do you want a relationship? Now, the truth is this. If you're a transitional dater, then it's not a matter of you only want sex or you want a relationship. It's a matter of, I want sex right now. I'm open to a relationship, but I don't want to give you the wrong idea that it's going to happen quicker than you would expect it to. So some people will go the under promise over deliver route. Some will just not have that conversation at all and just leave the woman alone, because it's like, all right, cool, she wants to be a little too in control of things, even though it's reasonable for somebody to want to know what they're getting themselves into. And then there's also like the women who, oftentimes the women who take that approach of, are we having sex or are we being in a relationship? Oftentimes when a woman is taking that particular stance, her mindset is going to be to see sex is just sex. There's nothing else. No long conversations on the phone, no cuddling up at night, no spending the night, no aftercare, none of that shit. It's just a matter you do your thing and you get up out of there. And sometimes in those particular types of scenarios, what can happen is when you take that mindset into how you're dealing with somebody, let's say she might just show some non-sexual values to you, but already have reserved in her mind that since you don't want a relationship, she's pre-rejecting herself. So if you actually start to build a connection, build a bond, then inadvertent behavior will make her either desire a relationship or feel deeply uncomfortable or feel that you're seeking to emotionally manipulate her through trying to get her emotionally attached when it's supposed to be only a casual scenario, right? And sometimes it's something that's done on purpose. Like, let's say it's an exercise in self-control. It's similar to a man who's in the friend zone, and he tells a woman he's cool with being friends, but then what he does is that he shows her he's cool with being platonic friends, but then he talks to her sometimes about the other women that he's having sex with. It may be women that she knows. He might get into a relationship, and he may do it in a way to where he's not giving her the extra benefits that come with a relationship, or the extra benefits that will come with a sexual relationship. So he doesn't give her any compliments or validation. And during that time, she begins to look at him in a different way, to view him more as a sexual alpha male type of guy through her interactions with him. And then those things begin to make her more attracted to him. And then, that can happen. It ends up turning into a sexual scenario. But because of the challenge, it's not going to be anything more than that. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. There's the whole bait and switch, where a man may meet a woman and take her out on a few dates and get to know her some and give her some quality validation, and then bring up his sexual intentions. And if she isn't receptive to his sexual intentions, he'll just stop talking to her, or he'll pull back. And then she will question herself. And as she questions herself, she's like, okay, cool. Maybe I'm losing the validation that I was previously receiving because I wanted to get to know him better, quote unquote, or I didn't want to come off as easy, and I wanted him to earn me. I wanted to, quote unquote, know my worth and know my value and respect myself. But then when that causes her to lose out on a man who's probably the one she's at least the most interested in, or who appears to be the most invested in her at the time, then she has to switch up on what she's doing. And then she says, okay, cool, I'm gonna have sex with him. But the fact that she wasn't down for it when he was down may turn him off, but he'll still take the sex. And that's kind of how it works sometimes, right? Where two individuals may meet one another and agree to just do one thing on one level, and then whoever wants more first loses sometimes. And that's kind of just how it works, right? And it really depends on if you're going towards the point of integration, right? So it's like if you're a man, right, and you set standards about what it's going to take to be more, and then a woman goes through those steps, and you start off in a sexual relationship, and she shows that she wants more. So you take that masculine stance and you vet the situation, and then things can become more if that's something that you're open to. Or a woman may be dating a guy, and then she'll, be dating a guy for a while, not give any, say that they're going to have sex, but just say, I only really want to have sex if I'm in a relationship. And the guy will date her, and he'll take his time, he'll get to know her, and then when she's ready, she'll let him know. And that's how things can go as well. But most people who find themselves in that position of power tend to abuse that power. Sometimes they abuse it through not being consistent with what they say that they want when it comes to other people, right? So like, let's say it's a man who says, oh, I'm not looking to jump into a relationship, right? And then he's just sleeping with the woman and letting her invest in him, and then he just jumps into a relationship with some random person out of nowhere. Or a woman who's in the gentleman gigolo complex, right, and making a man wait and work and show his investment in her emotionally, socially, and financially before they engage sexually. But then the whole time she's engaging in casual sex with men who she deems to be fuckboys, right? And these are things that can happen. And sometimes along the way, the person will actually seek to be integrated with the other person that they met who they didn't have those rules and standards with. And sometimes it'll just be a Madonna whore complex or a gentleman gigolo complex, where the person who's quote unquote following the rules isn't being treated or seen or viewed as a full person. They're being compartmentalized into this one aspect or particular area that a person desires, and typically that being the aspect of the other person that strokes their ego. So it's like they're just taking. So this is just Coach Brody on like my views on consent and a lot of these different things. What I will say is this, like there are certain things I am into, like I am into consensual non-consent, but that's not something I'm doing the first time I meet a woman, you know what I mean? There are times I'm into like blanket consent relationships. I think that's really the best way to go, but you have to have a certain level of sexual attraction that's mutual, and you also have to have a certain level of trust, and you have to understand that the person that you're engaging this way with has the ability to vocalize when they're not comfortable doing something and to say no, but for them to be somebody who desires you enough that most of the things that you're into, they're going to want to do it, and that they're going to be ready for, and they're going to be excited and ready to go along with it. And also, when you're thinking about these things, you also have to keep in mind that some people have a double mind or duplicitous mindset. They have sexual repression that causes them to give into a certain scenario in the moment when the energy is high, when the desire is high, when the arousal is high, when their inhibitions are low due to drugs or alcohol. But then after the moment, they have to vilify the experience they have because they have a love-hate relationship towards the power that their own desire has over them, especially if that's connected to an individual who isn't immediately giving them everything that they want out of a relationship. So this is Coach Brody, and my views on consent. I'm out.